and welcome to the Tansy Knits podcast. I'm Sarah A. here in Edmonton, Alberta. This is my little crafty podcast where I talk about things that I make by hand. Mostly knitting, but other things as well. I'd like to thank everybody who's checked out my videos so far and given me a chance. I've managed to keep up a good regular schedule, and yeah, that's pretty cool. So let's start with what I'm wearing today, because I'm gonna start with that. Today I'm wearing a handmade dress. This is a trapeze dress by Merchant & Mills in a natural linen, sort of a undyed linen that I bought in Montreal when I lived there, from one of the many fabrics shops that can be found north on St. Hubert Street. And I'm wearing my Stockbridge cardigan designed by Ysolda Teague, knit out of Holst Coast in Fig, which is a wool cotton blend. And yeah, I get a lot of wear out of this cardigan. So I haven't really finished anything this week. I've been I've been working on lots of different projects and starting some new projects. I think in rebellion to this idea that I should finish some whips, I decided to just cast on a bunch of stuff. But I also made good progress on some of my existing things too. So I'm going to start with, my Handspun Parisian Dreams, which you've seen a few times already. I made good progress. I fixed the neck shaping on both sides, figured out what size I was making, and completed the neck shaping for that size. I've also, as you can see, finished the first sleeve, which this is a design by Mina Philipp of Knitting Expat Designs, and I found the sleeve shaping instructions to be a little bit strange. And they sort of instead of being like at regular intervals, it changes for every increase when you do it. So I kind of figured out an average of what those decreases should be and made it a regular decrease, which you can see with my many stitch markers here. And so then I kind of started the second sleeve and then decided that I wanted to work on something else. We've been doing a lot of watching of shows this past week and sort of being cozy and being chill. So yeah, I've had lots of knitting time. Oh, and this is being knit out of some Handspun that I made, a 3-ply out of a bat that I got from Custom Woolen Mills when I went to visit there. And it's a traditional 3-ply, mostly woolen spun, but I don't know, my technique is not necessarily perfect, so it sort of varies a bit. And I was testing out a technique from this book called Spinning for Softness and Speed. The thickness is fairly consistent, but the texture is a little bit variable. And I think next time I would make it a 2-ply so it could be a little bit fluffier and softer. But these are things that I've sort of decided, having actually worked with my Handspun, which I don't often do. I often spin it and then put it in a box and don't really knit with it. Next is, I have to look up the name for this one. My number 10 Valldal damekofte by Sandnes Design. And this is being knit out of Briggs and Little Sport in sheep's gray and Jamieson of Shetland DK in number 530 Fuschia. And I was about here last time, so you see I've knit a fair chunk on the body there. So it's coming along nicely. Some point soon I'm going to have to make a decision about how long the body's going to be until the sleeves split. I'm going to base that off of a store-bought sweater that I wear a lot. Oh, and I forgot to mention my needle size. My size for the Parisian Dreams, I'm knitting that on a 3mm or US size 2.5 Lykke circular. And this one is on 3.75 or US 5 Lykke interchangeable needle. Yeah, so those are cruising along pretty good. And then, after I get a good chunk of progress, I decide I want to knit on something else. So, we move along. My next project that I worked on a bit, not a ton, was my Christmas, my Christmas Special socks, which are from the Vanilla Latte pattern by Virginia Rose Jeans. And this is being knit out of mustache yarn in Bumble's Bounce, which is a color I bought last year to knit socks. And I got around to it this year, as happens sometimes. Yeah, I really like this yarn. The gauge is knitting up quite nicely. And I'll pick them up again at some point. I just got some sock yarn in the mail, some more Christmas sock yarn that I had intended to make socks for some people in my family. So I have started a pair of those socks. These are kind of a surprise as who they're for, so I'm not going to say, but I'll show you the socks. These ones are a 64 stitch sock with a heel flap and gusset. I'm improvising the design on these. I'm not following a pattern, so I think I did about a 6-inch leg before starting the heel, and I'm well past the heel. And my sock gauge, I'm not sure if my sock gauge has changed a little or if just what I want out of socks has changed a little, like the gauge that I want to get. So normally I would knit this kind of commercial sock yarn. This is the Regia Candy Color in 1163 Zimstern. This kind of Regia, normally I would knit on a 2.25mm, but I think after hearing a bit about how M to the third have sort of been testing her gauge on socks to try and get something that's will wear a little better, I've also considered how tightly or loosely I've been knitting my socks and decided to try knitting them a little tighter. Yeah, either that or my gauge has changed a little bit and they seem a little bit too loose on the 2.25mm. Anyway, the 2.0mm or US size 0 is going quite nicely. And having started these like 2 days ago, that's pretty good progress, considering it's not the only thing that I've been working on. And I had ordered a yarn advent calendar for myself that is still not arrived yet. Yeah, I chalk it up to like shipping to Canada can take forever sometimes, but I just got a notification that it has crossed the border like yesterday. So yeah, maybe next year if I do this again, I might order from a Canadian dyer instead. Yeah. The Canadian border can be quite variable. Sometimes things can take a week and sometimes they can take 6 weeks. So, yeah, it's kind of a frustrating to have that happen as like your first advent calendar experience. So I got really frustrated with that, but I guess I should have ordered from Canadian dyer instead. So in anticipation of getting that advent calendar, I've sort of been mentally thinking about what I would do with all these minis. And like, I know a lot of people make these granny stripe blankets, which are quite nice, but I'm a little like the cozy memories, and sometimes the granny stripe blankets can have a really scrappy look. and which I find a little bit ugly. So I want to do something that's a little bit, maybe not planned. I like an improvisational kind of project, but something that maybe looks a little bit nicer. I don't know, like maybe with a bit more intention to it. So I have been mentally thinking about this Battenberg blanket by Sandra Paul, also known as Cherry Heart. And I've been sort of collecting minis. I've collecting, like, I buy minis that are not necessarily just a semi-solid that you would want to use for heels and toes. I've got some sort of speckly ones. So I've been kind of, and other sort of semi-solid kind of scraps that I've collected to sort of make kind of a color story going that sort of make, there are some that I have not chosen to include in this, but this is sort of where I've started. And I started some squares. I wound up a mini and started some squares to see how I like it. And the idea of this blanket is that you have all these crocheted colorful squares, and then the alternating squares, the one in the pattern, you use a cream for the alternating squares, so it's very checkerboardy, and and it's supposed to look like Battenberg cake, which is like an alternating pink and white cake wrapped in some kind of marzipan-y icing or something like that. So it's, this sort of iconic checkerboard look. And I've calculated that like each square takes about 1.5 grams of a mini. So I can get like 12 minis out of a mini, or 12 squares out of a mini skein. So I was kind of calculating how many squares I would need, and then how many out of each mini I would take. And like figuring that, one 20-gram mini, I could take maybe 10 squares out of that, but then I would still need like 45 minis, and just being like ready at the beginning and figuring that out has made it seem like a really big project. And I actually have other crocheted blankets that I have started and not finished. So after making these 4 little squares, I've decided to sort of put that aside for now. I've collected all the minis in this project bag, which is actually a nice Jen Hewitt screen printed project bag that I bought from her shop. So I'm just going to have those collected for now and earmarked for that project, and I'll work on it. I'll continue with it later on. So what I have drug out, and for that project I am using a 3mm hook, which looks like it's a US 5/0. Is that like a 5000 or something? I don't know. I don't know if you can read that. Maybe that's a British size. I don't even know. So that's what I'm using for that project. And so what I have done is I've gotten out my weekender blanket, which I started a couple years ago. I started this blanket because at the lake, my parents have a lake cabin about an hour out of the city, and there is an Afghan there that I made probably 15, 20 years ago, that I never, out of acrylic yarn that I never really wove the ends in on. And my parents were kind of making fun of me for having never woven the ends in, and it's acrylic. So I am making a new blanket for the lake. This is the Weekender pattern, also by Sandra Paul, I guess also known as Cherry Heart. And I believe it's a free pattern. And I love hexagons. When I started my hand-pieced hexagon quilt project in 2009, I kind of, you know, it's the sort of shape that you don't really think about, and then you start noticing it, and then you see it everywhere, and it's one of the, as a shape, it's like one of the few geometric shapes that can completely interlock with itself, which makes it awesome. And it either ends up looking very futuristic or like old, well, sort of antique-y, turn of the 20th century, or 19th to 20th century. Yeah, so I have a whole Pinterest board that's dedicated to hexagons, where I just collect good pictures of hexagons. So this, I've built out the width that I like for this, which is sort of going to be a throw. So it's about my wingspan. I'm 5'2", so my wingspan's about that. And so I've been, yesterday and this morning, I've been just chugging along, making all kinds of hexagons. And I've even involved my dad with, like, picking which color should come next. When I started this project, I went to a local yarn store with my mom, and we picked out a whole bunch of different colors. I think there's maybe like 15 or something. And they range from, they're mostly DK. They're mostly Drops Charisma, which is, I've got the whole bag here. Drops Charisma, which are, they're all solid colors. This one is which is 100% wool, and it's a DK weight. Some of them, we were really eyeing things for the color and the feel of them. Feel secondary, color first. And then I also have some which are this Drops Nepal, which are a little bit more of a heathered kind of color, and they're 65% wool, 35% alpaca. So I have a few colors of that. And I also have, this is a Barocco. It's their wool acrylic blend. I have two colors of that. Let me look it up here. Two colors of Barocco. Oh, is it vintage? Yes. Barocco Vintage DK, which these are 100 gram skeins, so they should be plenty. I'm not sure, some of them, like, I'm not that far along in the blanket, and some of the skeins are feeling a little light, so I might have to get second skeins of some of these colors. I'm not really concerned about dye lots because they're all individual hexagons anyway. So if they vary a little bit, that's not going to be critically terrible. Yeah, so this is sort of, yeah. Yeah, so this is really coming along. I do get a little bit of wrist pain from when I crochet, so I don't know that I'll work on this a lot, but when I feel like crocheting, I'm going to bring this out rather than continue on the Battenberg for now. And because the hexagons, they work up quite quickly. I can do a whole bunch in a relatively short amount of time and get satisfaction out of that. And I am joining as you go, which happens in the final round. The instructions do give you, they give you instructions on how to do that, and it does have its chart. There might be written instructions, but I'm a big fan of charts when it comes to knitting or crochet, and yeah, I find them very helpful to know exactly, especially with crochet, like where you're supposed to be lining your stitches up to, because sometimes you go in the space and sometimes you go into a chain, sometimes you go into the bottom of a stitch, or like sometimes you have to put 2 stitches into the foundation piece that you're working on. So it's good to be able to visualize how that happens in a chart. Yeah, so that's coming along quite nicely. And yeah, maybe if I keep moving on this, I could actually get it finished for Stash Dash this year, which would be nice to use all that yardage for. So that's everything that I'm working on at the moment. One thing that I did do was my parents get a live Christmas tree every year. We cleaned up our Christmas stuff yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. And took the tree out. And from the base of where the tree was in the living room, I was able to gather this baggie full of needles, which I plan to make into a little sort of Christmas pincushion sachet. Rather than just do the easy thing and make like a plain sachet out of fabric, I've actually picked out some cross-stitch patterns that are going to make their way to me. I'll pick out one of those for like little, one of them's like a berry pattern, one of those sort of strawberry pincushions, and one's a little hexagon pincushion, sampler kind of thing. Yeah, so I'll see which one I like better, and I'll go with that. And then this little bag of holiday cheer will become the filling for that. Because when you sort of crush the needles a little bit, you get the fir scent, which is quite lovely. And as for books, I'm still reading Craft. I am Craft by Alexander Langlands. I am most of the way through it, as you can see, and I am still enjoying it. It's because his expertise is more in farming techniques. That's mostly what the book is about. There's a brief part of a chapter that talked about weaving and the importance of weaving in ancient and contemporary cultures. But it's not a major part of the book, so it's maybe a little bit less interesting that way. But it's still like he's talking about stuff that he has a lot of knowledge and experience in, and talking with others with experience in those methods. So it is still informative that way. And the other book that I started reading is one that I've been waiting for from the library since the summertime, and that is this graphic novel, Green River Killer, by Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case, which is a true crime story of finding the Green River Killer, who I believe was known as the worst serial killer in U.S. history, who was responsible for deaths in the Seattle area. Yeah. So it's, I'm partway through, and it goes back in time, like sort of backwards and forwards in time, from this detective investigating these murders, and then when he gets a chance to interview the serial killer in I think 2003, I believe. So going back and forth from the 80s to 2003 to that interview. And yeah, it's for people who like true crime stories. This is an interesting, this is a compelling read. With nice artwork. And it's a fairly sizable comic, so fairly substantial. And I'm enjoying that so far. Although, like, I have a hard time saying I enjoy reading about true crime. Like, there's something about watching a detective story on TV that is contrived, and then even watching stories or hearing stories about true crime, like, it's a bit like making these things into entertainment can kind of doesn't always sit well with me, so it's hard for me to say that I enjoy reading about this true crime story, but it is an interesting read. And yeah, it's not to be taken lightly. Yeah, I'm not a big, I don't listen to a lot of true crime podcasts. I have listened to Serial, but it gives me a bit of an uneasy feeling just knowing that these things that we're talking about, real people and real events, makes me sort of take them a little bit more seriously rather than just fun entertainment. Yeah, so that's about it for me. Again, yeah, we're clocking in around 25 minutes, so that's not too bad. A little bit of dead air there. Yeah. Thanks for checking in, and I'll talk to you again sometime in the future.